Howdy, howdy, howdy. Welcome to a Thursday Collection Connection, where we're playing that game that's just an excuse to talk about records. I play the game with my brother, who is Eric, and he's over on the Plastic Soundwave Cult channel. Every Monday he shows a record, and every Thursday I show a record. And the game we've made out of it is that each album that we talk about has to relate in some way to the album shown in the previous video. And we ask you to guess what that connection might possibly be. Today we're going to forge a connection between the Raconteurs album, Help a Stranger, and The Record from Boy Genius, just from last year, 2023. That's coming up in a minute, but first we have to take care of the business of the previous connection, and that was connecting the Raconteurs album to Sting's The Soul Cages. And the connection there is that they are the only regular studio albums by either artist that do not feature that artist on the cover. So did you get it? I know who did get it, and that is Murdoch over on Murdoch's Music Minute. He guessed it and left it in the comments, which is what we ask you to do if you have a guess. So congratulations once again to Murdoch for a successful guess. And with that, let's get on with the show. All right, so the Raconteurs, Help Us Stranger. I don't have any Raconteurs. We've talked about both this band and Jack White solo before, all played by Eric. I have some White Stripes albums, a couple of them, and one Brendan Benson solo album, who was the other sort of front and forward member of the Raconteurs. But I'm less familiar with the Raconteurs music, and this album was pretty good. I'm going to mess up song titles, I know, but Don't Bother Me, Don't Bother Us, maybe, as a song made me think of Queen's jazz album, kind of distilled down into one track. And it was interesting, the version that I found to stream, to listen to, actually had some Jack White commentary that went along with each track, so it was interesting to hear who came in with the song and what happened with it and some of the ideas and things behind the songs, but still felt fairly on brand, brought a little bit more of that more polished guitar pop sound that Brendan Benson does so brilliantly on his own, kind of meshed with that a little more unpolished, unhinged Jack White guitar and songwriting style. Upon hearing the opening track, Bored and Raised, R-A-Z-E-D, pun on born and raised, mentioning being bored and raised in Detroit, I kind of wanted to make a connection through that to another album whose opening track mentions Detroit, and I found that Huey Lewis and the News Sports album, The Heart of Rock and Roll, which was one of the songs that I thought of that mentioned Detroit, actually does open that sports album. However, while I had it once upon a time on vinyl, I haven't had it in years and years and years and years. So even though I thought that would have been a pretty funny connection from the Raconteurs to Huey Lewis and the News, I wasn't able to do that one. I had to come up with something different, and in a short time constraint, I've decided to start the year off with an easy pitch and catch, looking for you to come up with the connection that you probably didn't need to watch further than 45 seconds into the video to figure out, and that is the connection to The Record by Boy Genius. Boy Genius is a band comprised of 3 successful female solo artists, Phoebe Bridgers, Lucy Dacus, and Julian Baker, who kind of became friends over time. I think both Phoebe and Lucy supported Baker on tour at different points, and they kind of became friends and collaborative friends and almost formed the band accidentally through a specific ethos that gave the band its name, Boy Genius, of wanting to collaborate together and encourage each other as female collaborators who often felt stifled in the presence of male collaborators who they felt had been told that their every thought was brilliant and didn't really want to listen to anybody else's suggestions, that they wanted to conduct a collaboration where they encouraged each other as if every thought that they had was worth exploring. And so that's where they came up with the name Boy Genius for the band. And their initial EP, just called Boy Genius, was 6 songs where each of them brought in one finished track and one that needed some work. And they put them all together into a 6-song EP. And 5 years, I forget exactly how many years passed, but it kind of dropped out of nowhere. The record from Boy Genius, which is a more considered thing, and I first heard, I think, them performing on Saturday Night Live, although they're very much up the alley of our local radio station that we listen to here. So my wife was more familiar with several of the tracks off of this album, and I bought it based kind of on wanting to be on the Phoebe Bridgers train. I'm really unfamiliar with Lucy Dacus or Julian Baker, their solo work, but I had bought Punisher, again, kind of amidst a bunch of hype, and I like that they are these 3 artists that got together and, again, are playing real songs with real instruments, and their voices blend together very well. But I don't know that ultimately the songs haven't grabbed me. So I'm pulling this out as a connection because as we approach 300 of these we've done, 150 each, you have to sometimes reach out for an easy connection to something that you haven't talked about before in order to expand the base of artists that you've talked about and that you might otherwise have a difficult time connecting to, not necessarily knowing a lot about it in the first place. And so I saw a pretty wide open opportunity to connect the Raconteurs to the Boy Genius album. And so I jumped on it, even though honestly after having bought it, I gave it maybe a couple of spins. It didn't grab me. Not because it was bad, it just didn't feel like necessarily the hooks were there, not strong enough. It's hard for me to even think how that goes because whenever I try it, it's a good song, but if I try to play it in my mind, it is not strong enough, or strong enough, I guess, by Sheryl Crow that comes into my head instead of the Boy Genius song, because they both are, am I strong enough to be your man, or I'm not strong enough to be your man, is the chorus line sort of both. And so I haven't given it enough shots to really let it marinate. And the same is actually true of the Phoebe Bridgers album that, again, I saw her perform on Saturday Night Live. I thought, hey, that sounds interesting. That sounds pretty good in a very different way. And perhaps unfairly, they haven't jumped into my attention when I played the songs. It was the album played and ended and nothing necessarily stood out for me to make me cue it up a second time. So the couple of airings that I've given them haven't yielded songs that got stuck in my head that I wanted to listen to again and again, the way, say, the Linda Lindas that I talked about a couple of weeks ago, hooky as hell. That's fantastic. And the setup, specific setup, and there's the 3 of them on the back cover there, also makes me think of a Canadian version of Boy Genius, which was a one-off album collaboration of Nico Case, Katie Lang, and Laura Veers. And their album, Case Lang Veers, strikes me as a superior record to this one, or at least it wormed its way into my imagination. And even without hooks, the particular atmosphere on that album, giving each in the same way, their individual songs to shine in, and so it doesn't become a 3-way harmony all the time. Lots of time it does sort of on the chorus of this album, and each one gets to kind of sing a verse of the song. But I would need to listen to it more times for it to really resonate, to have individual tracks stand out to me. But I thought it was interesting to listen to, as it's on a lot of people's best of lists for last year, and I felt like that made it worth talking about some, even though I haven't given it enough airtime myself to have a really strong opinion about it one way or the other. Again, I don't think that it's bad. I just think that that it didn't grab me enough, that I listened to it often enough in order to get an opinion on it. The airing that I gave it in the last couple of days here was only the third time that I had played the album since I bought it last year. And it just hasn't been enough time. And it hasn't been enough time in the last couple of days to let it soak up and really come up with a sophisticated opinion on the album. But certainly I wouldn't not recommend it. I just can't speak very eloquently on it at this moment. But it is an album in my collection, and that's the basis of the rules. And if you miraculously were able to determine the connection between the record by Boy Genius and the Raconteurs' Help Us Stranger, then leave that guess in the comments and you will receive a shout out in the next video. That being Eric's video next Monday on the Plastic Soundwave Cult. It's pretty easy, so just be the first one in there. Like I said, you could have gotten it in the first 45 seconds of the video. And with that, I've said all that I have to say, so I thank you for watching. Bye-bye.